Hello and welcome to WTTW's Firsthand Segregation, an intimate look at segregation in Chicago. My name is Tim Russell, Vice President of Community Engagement and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for WTTW and WFMT. And I'm excited that you have joined us for this important conversation. WTTW's purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. Essential to this purpose are our core values, in particular, diversity and equity. We celebrate differences, embrace inclusivity, and strive for equity. The stories we tell, as well as the people in front of and behind the camera, reflect the faces and voices of our region. I moved to Chicago in 1993 to attend grad school. I had a month before classes started, so I set out to learn the city. I bought a train pass, and for 30 days, I would ride the train, get off at a stop, and take the bus. This exploration taught me a lot about the city. It taught me that there were these great communities with fantastic people, cultures, and delicious food. However, it also taught me that the city was a far cry from how I grew up and what I experienced. You see, Chicago was the illustrative example of 11 a.m. on Sunday, the most segregated hour. What I soon found out was that 11 a.m. in Chicago was all the time. While experiencing Chicago as a news resident, I couldn't help but think that the city and region was missing out on untapped talent, culture, and relationships. Earlier today, we launched Firsthand Segregation, part of WTTW's award-winning multimedia, multi-year initiative, focusing on the firsthand perspectives of people facing critical issues in society. Throughout 2022, WTTW's Firsthand Segregation will put a human face on the impact racial divisions have on individuals, the city, and our region through a documentary series, expert talks, text and visual journalism, and partnership with Southside Weekly, Invisible Institute, and our own WTTW newsroom, and community discussions and engagement in partnership with the Folded Map Project and the Metropolitan Planning Council. You can find this content on our website at wttw.com/firsthand. Join us in the coming year for community screenings and conversations about segregation and its impact. These events will invite local residents, practitioners, policymakers, and the philanthropic community to engage in dialogue and explore ways to effect change, positive change. Please visit wttw.com/events for upcoming dates. Following tonight's event at 7 p.m., I would like to encourage you to watch Segregation, a WTTW news special. You can watch or stream on all WTTW platforms. Now, before we get things going, I'd like to extend a very special thanks to support of this project, who you can see listed here. Without the generous support of these donors, sponsors, and WTTW members, Firsthand would not have made possible. Thank you. Now, please enjoy the trailer.
As you look at the city, you can almost tell by the skyline, right, where the opportunity is.
Segregation is deliberate when it's economically and racially driven.
We're pushed out of certain neighborhoods.
They pretty much let you know that they really don't want you here.
It was very Mexican, but no Black people.
How do we figure this out? How do we become more participatory?
Every neighborhood should reflect what our city is about. And it's about everybody, not just one race.
Welcome, I'm Dan Protess, executive producer of Firsthand Segregation. And welcome now to all of our guests. You can all turn your cameras and microphones on. We have Tonika Johnson with us. She's the creator of the Folded Map Project and the co-founder of the Englewood Arts Collective. Tonika delivered one of our firsthand talks, which you can watch now at wttw.com/firsthand. José Rico is the director of Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Greater Chicago. He also delivers one of our firsthand talks. Pastor Ricky Brown, welcome, the founder of New Creation Church in Woodlawn. He's one of 15 people featured in our documentary series, which you can watch at our website. And Nan Parson is the co-founder and chair of Action Ridge, and she also appears in one of those documentaries. And for all of you at home, you're already entering in the chat, but keep an eye on the chat function. We want to hear from you about your experiences with segregation, and we'll also be dropping in some data from our partners at the Metropolitan Planning Council. Tonika, let's start with you. Chicago, of course, is known as one of the most segregated big cities in America. It's such a fact of life here that you'd think we'd talk about it all the time and we'd feel totally comfortable talking about it. Why do we struggle to talk about segregation?
Well, I personally believe that one of the primary reasons we struggle is one, we have normalized it. We've normalized it in a way that we don't even realize. Sometimes it takes transplants or outsiders to kind of jolt us into remembering, oh, it is really segregated here. And also because we are segregated and we haven't had the practice or the kind of constant interaction in order to feel comfortable enough to have these conversations once we do, come in contact with each other. And so it makes it very difficult to learn how to have a conversation when you can't even practice it, when you're not around the people who are economically and racially different than you enough to even learn how to ask questions and accept being corrected. So it's a matter of not having the opportunity, and we have to actually seek out opportunities, and the burden shouldn't be on us, but it is. And that's a lot to kind of attempt to do.
And you've been giving people the opportunity to enter into dialogue with each other. Your folded map project, you might facilitate a conversation between someone who lives, let's say, at 6500 North Winchester. You'll introduce them to someone at 6500 South Winchester. You also hold workshops as well. What do you do in those settings to help the participants push past their fears?
Creating the space for honesty and transparency to actually happen, which requires people to feel comfortable enough to be honest. And the way in which I do that is, let all of the participants know that we're all participating in a system that was created before us. Even though we have people who are most negatively impacted by it and others who aren't as well, I try to express that we are all impacted. Black and brown neighborhoods are not just segregated. We are all segregated. And if we can just accept the fact of that, then we can enter into a conversation a bit more honestly, and others can start to recollect on how segregation started to either be normalized or an issue for them in their life. So really just creating space for honesty to occur.
Jose, let's turn to you. Your organization holds trainings. What do you find are the keys to starting a productive conversation about segregation?
Yeah, and I think like Tonika mentioned, a big part of these conversations is for people to feel that level of comfort in having this conversation about race. And honestly, very few people are comfortable having that conversation, because then people feel like they are being attacked or they are being objectified. But what we have been able to do is really have these conversations that are not theoretical. We always base these conversations on people's personal experience. And everybody has a story to share about a time where they became race conscious. And people talk about how they first became race conscious as a child, or a time when they were, they developed a relationship with somebody that they thought was different than them. And then they realize in these conversations that we have in our racial healing circles that we have a lot more in common then we are different. And then, one of the things that slowly happens when we have these conversations and people are starting to just share their stories is they realize that racism really, truly affects all of us. And although, we always think about racism as something that can never change and something that will always be with us, there are always moments where people see each other's humanity beyond the color of their skin, because our experiences and really who we really are as human beings is we want to be in relationship with each other. So this segregation is really unnatural to us as individuals. It makes absolutely no sense why, the viaduct on Cermak is what separates Little Village from North Lawndale, and we have very few relationships in those viaducts. But it's been part of our history, and it's something that we need to really make an effort to really go back to who we really are, which are social people that we want to be in community with each other.
And so, Jose, you're talking about these divides that obviously that viaduct was placed there a long time ago, but these theoretical or emotional divides still exist. And I think this kind of gets at the entire premise of our project, which is that segregation isn't just something that happened in our past, that it really affects residents of our city every day. Can you give us some examples of how segregation affects Chicagoans in 2022?
Yeah, I think they are emotional, but there's also legal divides, right? There are those racial covenants that happen and still affect us today. I think one of the biggest things that really hurt us at a city through segregation is we know that the city is Chicago because of the Black experience, the Black community here in Chicago, and just the beauty and the wealth of the Black community here in Chicago. Also, the Latino and the Mexican community has contributed so much to the city, but we are always looked at as separate from the rest of the city, and we are looked at just a small part of what the city has to offer. But when we all know, when we go all over the US, that when people talk about Chicago, they talk about all the accomplishments and everything that's come out of Black Chicago. And when you talk about Mexican food in the country, you will get Chicago as one of the top Mexican food places in the US for Mexican food. We know this because, I go down to Inglewood and Tonika comes to Little Village, but that is something that very few people know because we are also segregated and are just not used to flowing in the different parts of our city like we need to.
Pastor Ricky, let's turn to you. You actually intentionally founded a church that is multi-ethnic and integrated. But just an interesting bit of your background, you moved to Chicago about 10 years ago from Mississippi. And we see in your documentary how eye-opening it was to discover the extent of segregation in Chicago. So how is segregation here similar or different from what you knew growing up in the South?
Well, thank you, Dan. I think the end result is the same, and that is people of color get the short end of the stick. Lack of infrastructure, lack of good schools, lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to, healthy food places and that kind of thing. The end result is the same. But what shocked me was how pronounced it is here. And, coming from Mississippi, you would think that, hey, that place is super segregated. And in many ways it is. But I'll never forget going to a meeting. And I knew I was new here. I've been here maybe a month or two, and I knew I had to get on the red line to go to Uptown, which is north. And I messed up and got on the wrong side of the L. So I was downtown. The train was very diverse. And within 3 stops, it was all Black. And I said, oh man, I think I'm headed in the wrong direction. Got on the train again, headed north. By the time I got back downtown, the train was diverse. And then within 3 stops, the entire train was white almost. And I was like, oh my God, where did I move? I heard that it was segregated like that, but that illustration right there really gave me a vivid picture, so the outcomes are the same, but it's pronounced and demonstrated in different ways. So
Nan, let's bring you into the conversation. You've lived in Park Ridge for most of your adult life, and you say in your documentary that you always felt comfortable there, but it took you time to realize that you felt comfortable there because it's mostly white. When did you come to realize that?
I think when I started looking into my own issues, how I have been affected by segregation and by racism. I suppose it was when I started reading more and became interested in educating myself about the history of the Chicago area. And I don't know where I read it once, but I think what Tonika said about having to realize that we're all segregated sort of opened my eyes, that I thought of, that the other people are segregated and I'm somehow not affected by this. And
you also,
that's not true, and then I realized, well, one reason I thought Park Ridge was a good place for me to live was because it was
I think Nan is breaking up a little bit. Oh, I think we have you back. And you also, at some point, you adopted a biracial son. Was that eye-opening for you? Did that cast your hometown, Park Ridge, in a kind of different light?
Yes, because we thought very long and hard about whether we wanted to stay in Park Ridge, whether that, how comfortable it would be for Mark, what kind of issues he would have living in a predominantly white community. And we made a decision to stay. And then we had to think about, what does this mean for our little boy? And I do think it was hard for him in many ways. And my husband and I have kind of struggled with making that decision. But we ended up deciding to send him to the high school that is more diverse, much more diverse than, there are two high schools within the city limits of Park Ridge. One is Maine South and one is Maine East. And so thinking about what would be good for him made us think about what the limitations are in living in such a segregated city.
Tonika, let's talk a little bit about how you came to your work. In your firsthand talk, you talk about the experience of going to Lane Tech High School on the north side from your south side neighborhood, Englewood. And you talk about all the relationships you built with people from different backgrounds at Lane Tech. How did that shape you?
Oh, it completely expanded my worldview at a young age. At an age that young enough where most Chicagoans and people who come to Chicago don't even get to have that kind of experience. And it really helps you not only become more empathetic and learn about other cultures, it also helps you transform and value your own culture and recognize that you actually do have a cultural identity when you're interfacing with others that are educating you about theirs. And beyond just the education about other cultures, just the practice of interacting, the practice of learning how to be corrected, because you are going to say offensive things when you're getting to know someone that you've never encountered before. And then you add the layer of a different nationality, then you add the layer of a different geographic place. So in your quest to understand and get to know each other, especially if you share an interest or a passion, you're gonna make mistakes. But we were teenagers, so it it didn't have that much threat to it because we were trying to get to know each other. And so we just had practice in learning how to listen, learning how to be corrected. And that's something that unfortunately, because of segregation, people don't know how to do. And we are struggling with our perceptions of stereotypes and not having a way to learn how to break through it. So that's what that experience exposed me to. It exposed me to the beauty of what Chicago truly has to offer, as well as the arts community here. It gave me a different lens to see my city. And that's the lens that I want to show others, that you are missing out. There is no reason for us to be as segregated as we are socially, when all you have to do is pursue an interest and connect with others who you might share that with.
So, and what you said you're missing out, what are you missing out on? You say in your talk that Chicago's systemic segregation can seep into our social network and influence who we get to know and don't get to know. What's the benefit of having a social network that extends beyond your own racial group or neighborhood or socioeconomic status?
Beyond just more fun, let's just put that out there, which the arts community here knows deeply. And I wish the rest of Chicago could just have a camera on the many ways in which people disrupt segregation all the time. We don't show enough examples of that because we do. Chicagoans constantly find creative ways to disrupt segregation. But what you miss out on outside of fun is just a more enhanced life. And I think the easiest way that people can understand this concept is, what is the saying in business? It's not what you know, it's who you know. And if we can apply that to business, then it should be easy for us to understand how segregation can impact so many aspects of our lives because it is who you know. And segregation prevents us from building relationships that we would have with each other.
Jose, you grew up in Little Village, a largely Mexican-American enclave in Chicago, and yet you say you repeatedly heard the message that you needed to leave your language and culture aside to be successful. Where was that message coming from?
It was coming from schooling. It was coming from my elementary school teachers, where they did not speak Spanish, and they were not Latino or Latina, and so they saw my language and my identity as a deficit, as something that needed to change, where I needed to learn English only, and my identity as a Mexicano needed to be erased, because there was no way I was going to be successful and still be my true self and still value my community's values of communalism and still be able to, bring my whole family along and my whole community along. These are values and practices that are not seen as ways to be successful in the society. And that just kept getting reinforced. The more I was, I was advancing in my career, that type of mindset of individuality, of getting yours, and of leaving the neighborhood as a way for success. That is the struggle that I think a lot of Black and Brown people really need to deal with, because our communities are seen and portrayed in material fact, right, by the lack of amenities, the lack of our streets being clean, the lack of places for our families to go to, because those resources are being taken and going to the North Shore and to other neighborhoods in the wealthy parts of Chicago. I was a high school principal in Little Village where 19 moms went on a hunger strike because the school that was supposed to be built there, where $40 million got allocated to build that school, that money never showed up, because that money was used to build Walter Payton High School and Northside College Prep High School. And it wasn't for the parents in Little Village who really put themselves on the line, Little Village High School wouldn't have been built, right? So there are many instances, again, it's not just the mindset, but it's very clear policies and practices that really cement the segregation And it takes efforts like this, but it also takes public policy changes, and it also takes the allocation of investments in our communities so that every community is a desirable place to go and where we could send our kids to the same schools, not just the schools that have the highest number of resources, which usually, again, under a segregated system, are not in Black and brown neighborhoods.
So, and when resources are diverted to other neighborhoods, and when you're sent that message, whether overtly or by more subtle means, that your culture needs to be set aside in order for you to be successful, how did you move past that?
What I've been able to do is to always be in community with folks that I know love me and that are going to fight with me, right? At the end of the day, this is about shifting people's minds and hearts so we could shift the power dynamic for us to be able to make the change that we want. So, oftentimes what we saw, over the summer, a couple of years, when we saw young people out in the streets protesting the institutional racism that is so woven into the way our city works, that was a way for all of us to be able to realize something needs to change. And I really give those young people a lot of credit because they challenged all of us. Are we going to provide a place where young people see a future here in Chicago? Which means that we need to make the changes necessary that they have an opportunity here. Because if we don't, that means that we are okay with the violence that this inequity puts upon everyone. And that violence is the lack of housing, is the lack of educational opportunities, is the lack of well-paying jobs where people could live without having to go and get food out in the pantries. That is our responsibility. And so this is something that I'm here to be able to be in community with people that not only want to change the system, but also want to, as Tonika says, want to be able to really enjoy our diversity and be in community with people full of love and full of being able to make our city a place for everyone, not just for rich people that have the means to enjoy all the resources that our city has to offer.
Let's take a few minutes now to watch some of Pastor Ricky's documentary, a few pieces of setup that are necessary to understand this. First of all, when he's not a pastor, Ricky also pilots airplanes, and he uses a term I wasn't familiar with, which is church planting, which is another way of saying founding a new church. And as I mentioned earlier, the church he founded, he set out to very intentionally integrate. He calls it a multi-ethnic ministry. Here's a clip from Pastor Ricky's story, which again, you can watch at WTTW.com/firsthand.
I'm going to ask that you would stand for the reading of God's word. Luke 10:38 through 42. I do not mind taking risks. I mean, I fly airplanes. And I just really felt like God was placing church planting on my heart. And I'm like, man, this is one of the riskiest things in ministry you can do, starting a church. She had a sister called Mary. The truth is, starting a multi-ethnic church is going to grow slower. It's not going to move as fast. If I planted an all-black church, man, that would be easier for me. That's my home. That's my upbringing. This is absolutely harder. You see, there's too much cotton candy theology that we're listening to. It sounds good, it looks good, it tastes good, but it has no nutritional value. I absolutely think that multi-ethnic ministry can cause a harmony and a coming together and to combat some of the division in our city, because what a great testimony, right? What a great sight to see. People who don't look like they would normally be hanging out, people who don't look like they would normally be fellowshipping together. And I can tell you, the reason why it's important for us to have a church that is both multi-ethnic and multicultural is mainly two reasons. One, it's biblical, okay? We see this in the book of Revelations, every tribe, every nation, every tongue. Number two reason is because Hyde Park is multi-ethnic and multicultural. And I believe that the church should reflect the community that we're in. God, use us despite of us. In the matchless name of Jesus we pray, amen. Now please, give God praise in this house. Let's worship the Lord. Hang around with us. I love to meet you. God bless you. Thank you. So one of the things that I was not as aware of was how many people who would say, I don't want to be a part of a multi-ethnic church. How you doing, brother?
Well, congratulations.
You're inspiring me. Thank you, man. You know, many African Americans in the city of Chicago know what it's like to have to feel as though they need to watch their mannerisms, watch how they pronounce their words, or watch how they dress all throughout the work week, that when they come to Sunday morning, they just want to be Black. They just want to be who God has made them to be. And so I began to realize that, wow, maybe not everybody is ready to take this journey of being a part of a multi-ethnic church at this particular place in their life. I think that that's one of the biggest hindrances to multi-ethnic ministry, because we cannot heal and move forward until we acknowledge the pain of our past.
Pastor Ricky, you talk about how a multi-ethnic church is going to grow slower, and you say it requires more sacrifice from the people who worship there. And you gave me a kind of couple of examples that seem relatively minor, such as the music you play in the church and the food you serve. Tell us about those minor sacrifices that people make by partaking in multi-ethnic ministry.
Well, first off, Dan, music is never going to be minor to people of color. It's really, really big. You know, I think that, I mean, you guys follow me in that documentary To Community Christian out in Naperville. I think that there are just some very differences in worship styles. For one, Black folks tend to gravitate toward music that we can feel. That's just a result of what has happened to us over the years, hymns and things that were written out of a very real place of struggle, gospel music that reaches right to the soul even today. And then, you know, my white friends tend to listen to Christian music that is more cerebral or more contemplative, if you will. So, yeah, the other thing was just different things like just the culture, right? You know, in a monocultural setting, there's just certain things that are just okay. But you have to watch what you say. You have to watch what you do, because you don't want to offend a specific group. So yeah, in that regard, we knew that we had twice the hill to climb concerning doing ministry in a multi-ethnic context.
And so then is part of your job as pastor to encourage the community to kind of push outside of their comfort zone?
You know, absolutely. And I think to some extent, I know that I'm in ministry, but to some extent, we're really probably all going to say the same things. And here it is: push back past your preferences, push past what you're comfortable with, push past what would benefit you for the betterment of the entire Chicago. And I think that that's something that everybody could agree with, no matter what their background is. And so it's the same thing. It's pushing past what you're comfortable with, what your personal preference is, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, my wife and I, we're blessed. Okay, we enjoy certain privileges that some other people of color might not. So it's not just incumbent upon those that are in politics, there are those that are in a leadership position, although the things that Jose was sharing with me really strike home, because I know for a fact that what he's saying is absolutely true. There are resources that are dedicated to one specific area, one specific community, and they somehow magically appear on the north side in brick and mortar. It happens all the time. I see it as a pastor attending meetings with the city of Chicago, community leaders. It's the same song and dance all over again. And what he's saying is absolutely true. It is a perpetual cycle that keeps on happening. So yes, I think it's all about, again, setting aside what our personal preferences are and for the betterment of the overall community here in the city of Chicago.
And so why are you creating an integrated community? You talk about the inequitable distribution of resources. Is it partially out of a sense of, in some way, helping to tackle that inequity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another saying that people can check out is a lot of white mega churches across the country are participating in something called justice deposits. Justice deposits is something where they are infusing cash into Black-owned banks. When you look at banks like, JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America and other large banks, and look at the disparity in the amount of money that they loan in Black and brown communities to buy homes for mortgages, and juxtapose that with how many banks they have in those communities, it is staggering. So that means that Black-owned banks having more capital is the only thing that's separating them from being able to loan more dollars to people to begin to purchase and own real estate. So about 75% of the capital that Black-owned banks have, they loan it to people of color to purchase houses. And so those type of relationships don't happen if we stay apart. Those type of opportunities don't happen if you stay on your side and I stay on my side. That church feature deposited $1 million in the Black banks. There's another institution in Ohio that's doing it. Now I'm hearing Netflix and Amazon, I believe, and Google even are depositing money in the Black banks. So it's more than just a conversation. It's more than just having prayer breakfasts and things. I'm all about actionable results that's going to move the needle forward for people that are born into this vicious cycle of segregation here in the city of Chicago.
And you're actually working with a church in Naperville that's making those justice deposits, and we see that in your story. Tonika, when you introduce people to their map twin and when you hold your workshops, how do you address people's differences? It seems like potentially there could be a tension between wanting people to learn about how life is different for people of other races on the one hand, but on the other hand, trying to get them to see their shared humanity. Is there a delicate balance that you need to strike there?
Actually, there isn't. I uplift the commonality that already exists, which is they're choosing to focus on this issue. Them even being in my workshop, them even being interested in my projects, them even following me on Instagram, they hold the sincerity of wanting to address this large systemic issue as a commonality. And I just merely uplift that and show it as a mirror for them to see each other through. And that way, it creates an opportunity for them to struggle with whatever conversation they need to have in regards to trying to understand each other. But it's not even anything to understand. We have enough reports, we have enough statistics, we have enough visual evidence, which I'm able to share with them through just my project. So the conversations start at a different point. In my workshops and when I talk to people, it starts with them being empowered to know that building relationships with each other is a form of protest. No critical movement in our country in regards to civil rights. Even Chicago, we're an amazing organizing city and we have history, even with Fred Hampton, Rainbow, well, what now is Rainbow Push, but the Rainbow Coalition. Those things matter, those relationships matter because that's how you build a movement. That's how you're able to build a movement strong enough to create, change in policy and government. And so just really helping people see that these moments where they think it's just, oh, I'm just getting to know somebody different than me. No, this is how you move a large issue forward. You have multiracial, multicultural coalitions that have a commonality in what issues are important to them, and then they start to take action. But in order to get to that point, you have to be empowered to know that disrupting it personally actually mean something, because we've done it the legal route, we've done it policy, and we're still not there. And I personally believe it's because we haven't placed the largest importance on the personal aspect of all of this. And I feel like if we infuse that into everything that's existing now and be reminded that Chicago has a history of organizing through relationship building, then we can get there. So that's really what I do. I just remind them that they already have so much in common, and to share with each other what in their life has gotten them to share this in common.
I see Jose nodding. I heard him say almost the exact same thing word for word. So I know he's in full agreement, but I do want to give
my boy.
I do want to give Nan an opportunity to talk here. So Nan, you founded an organization called Action Ridge, and you're working to integrate Park Ridge by increasing the supply of affordable housing. Why is affordable housing the kind of lever that you're pushing to integrate your suburb?
Well, part of the reason we're doing it now, I've been working on this for over 10 years, I guess, but we are making a more concerted effort currently because Park Ridge is in the process of creating the comprehensive plan. And so we think we have a lever, I guess, to increase affordable housing in Park Ridge. The reason that's important is because we want to try to welcome people to our city whose incomes may not be, as great as many of our residents. And in that way, some of those people who come to Park Ridge might be people of color, which would be great. But it also is just sort of I guess, a message that we feel that is important to give, that our community welcomes people who are different than the majority of us. Park Ridge is, interestingly, it's very segregated as a city because we do have people of color that are residents of Park Ridge, but most of them live north of sort of along Dempster in the northern part of the city. And a goal for us is for us to make it possible for people of all levels of income and ethnic backgrounds and so on to live all over the city, not to have such a great separation. And so increasing affordable housing, we feel, is one way to do that. And we also believe we have a lot of support in increasing affordable housing. It's happening all around us, and Park Ridge is behind in that process.
And so that then has raised a question, and that is, will affordable housing be enough? And is there something that would need to be done to make Park Ridge feel more welcoming to people of color? Is there, and I know that is a question that you're grappling with daily. Maybe we could check in. How are you feeling about that today?
Well, it's just a very difficult problem. I would love it if we could be part of the Folder Map project. I thought about that. I've known about Tonika and this project that she's involved with and she started, and it's great. But we're in the suburbs, so we don't get.
No, you can still fold a map. You can still fold it.
Well, I was thinking that being involved in this process of creating this series I've learned so much just in doing it. And I felt that all along, everything that we've been doing with Action Ridge has been a process. Mm-hmm. And one thing leads to the next thing. And, having been chosen to be in this series has been amazing for me. And I'm so gratified and honored, actually. And I feel like maybe the next step is going to be that we're going to be able, as an organization, as Action Ridge, to be involved in situations where we get to know people who are different than we are. And to do what Tonika and Jose have said that we know is so important, but we have a hard time figuring out how to do it. Tonika said that too. We don't have practice. We haven't practiced this. We need a push or something. I don't know what, but I have a feeling maybe this series is going to be that push for us, which would be wonderful.
Let's take a
I would
minute now.
suggest that you all take a group trip to the Silver Room Block Party, and you will see what you're missing out on.
Okay.
Well, so Tonika, how, if you were advising the village or the city of Park Ridge, what would you say if they wanted to? Because if a neighborhood is entirely white, who wants to be the first African American or Latino to live on that block or in that neighborhood? How do you make a place more welcoming? What would be the first step?
Well, it's sad that the burden has to be on the residents, but you know, this is where the systemic part comes in. You know, it has to come from our local governments to really make equitable access to education and housing there. But beyond that, you know, just being aware that there is a community that's like yours, but a different race, and being interested enough to get to know or visit another community that's racially different than yours, that you might have something in common with, but just starting there, knowing that you can visit another community that you might share something in common with, but just actually doing it. And that's what the Folded Map Project really tries to help people understand, is that there are many ways to enter this conversation, but more importantly is to simply get out there, actually go to different neighborhoods, and not necessarily to be of service, because how you enter a neighborhood truly determines how you view the neighborhood. So not just volunteering, meet someone who is literally your peer, you know, and the way you can do that is at events. That's why festivals and arts events are so important, because there is no hierarchy. You're literally going to experience another neighborhood and the best they have of it and the fun that they have of it. And I think that that's why arts and festivals and all of those kind of entertainment opportunities are important, because it allows someone to experience another neighborhood just as a peer, you know, as opposed to being a volunteer.
Yes. I just wanted to say that Action Ridge, we did start out sort of volunteering, and we realized that that wasn't what we wanted to do. And so we stepped back and began to educate ourselves to understand the deeper causes of segregation and inequities before, and not see ourselves as sort of like white saviors, you know, that are going to come into the community. And that has been a really great decision. I'm so glad we did that.
Let's have a look now at a clip from Nan's documentary where we learn a bit about the work that Action Ridge does. Again, this is one of 15 documentaries you can watch at WTTW.com/firsthand.
I always have looked for ways to make change, especially community organizing and so on. So I'm going to pick the best ones to give away and keep the weird ones. Over 10 years ago, I heard about this interfaith housing group that was working on increasing affordable housing in northwestern suburbs. See the contrast between the red carrot, the white carrot. We have diversified carrots. Isn't that cool? I began studying the issue, and then eventually I formed Action Ridge, which is a social justice group here in Park Ridge. Hello, my dear.
Hi, darling.
How was Boston? The racial makeup of Action Ridge is predominantly white, because we're all white here, and it's mostly women. Action Ridge has tried to include people of color, but it's been hard. I think, you know, we don't know very many, for one thing, and the couple of times we've tried, people of color have not wanted to be part of Action Ridge. I mean, often we're talking about things we don't really know about. We're just talking in theory and don't have the experience. But there's also the issue, which I can understand, of why should people of color try to teach us white folks? Okay. All right, I want to welcome you all to Action Ridge tonight. I'm so glad you could come. And we predict rightly that this will be a very interesting evening on the subject of affordable housing and segregation, particularly focusing on Park Ridge and Park Ridge environs. And our first speaker is Ann Kapustiak, who is a recent graduate from Tulane University, where she did research on affordable housing. Take it away.
This is a really important topic, obviously, to be discussing, and I'm presenting evidence about what has occurred, but the whole reason we're all here is to talk about what can be done moving forward in the future. So this is just to provide a little context for, why Park Ridge is not the most diverse place.
Having lived here for 50 years, 55 years, it sort of struck me that we were segregated. I mean, it's so silly. We know it, we see it all the time. Many of us are sort of denied, I think, what we could see before us. More and more we're realizing this was done on purpose.
This is an example of a redlining map. You can see that the red area is further into the inner city. Those are populations that either have very high poverty or very high populations of races that were considered not desirable at the time. Park Ridge does technically have some of those yellow areas, but the reasoning in the report for why it was marked that is to do with the physical value of the properties. The houses in that area were not as nice anymore, and it was a little bit run down. Whereas if you look at Humboldt Park, which is in that red area, that received a negative red marking because of, quote, Negro infiltration. So there's a very clear bias here in the way that the government is suggesting where to spend money, and it's 100% correlated with race. Park Ridge, like a lot of municipalities in the area, actually allowed racial covenants, meaning
there were 2 communities in Park Ridge where there were covenants, which read clearly, you may not buy or rent in this area unless you're Caucasian. And then over time, it just snowballed or sort of continued that once people felt excluded, people of color didn't try to live in this part of Park Ridge.
I am so disappointed that we're so short on time because we could talk for another hour. Quickly, the group there was very intentionally focused on history. And these days, history is really being politicized, and there are fights over who gets to tell America's story. Pastor Ricky, you say in your story that we cannot heal and move forward until we acknowledge the pain of our past. What do you mean by that? And what is, why do you think exploring our history is important?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. I just, it really frustrates me to see the attack on just telling the truth. Our country was literally founded on racism. We perfected this. It's a part of our past, and it's a part of our present. And until we acknowledge, the things that have been done and the things that continue to be done, we can't heal and move forward. So, yeah, I'm more about actionable results than I am just simply coming to the table to diversify it. There can't be reconciliation if there is never restitution.
And Jose, you urge Chicagoans to look all the way back to the very founding of this city.
Yeah, I think, I think our city, just like our country, really needs a truth, racial healing, and transformation process that we need to go through, right? Over the last 2 years, we've engaged close to 20,000 Chicagoans in racial healing circles. If anybody wants to be a part of racial healing circles, you could go to our website and sign up. But we need to go through this process, as we've all, have acknowledged, that to look at our history and the truth of our history, to envision a future without racism in the city of Chicago. Imagine a future of our city without segregation, where our relationships are based on interdependent relationships, and where we could transform our city, where wealth is not stuck and hoarded by one group of people in a few neighborhoods. So we need to go through a process, and I really want to encourage people to join all of us in this process through a truth, racial healing, and transformation process that our city should go through.
And the process that your organization uses was actually modeled in part on one that was used in post-apartheid South Africa. How does that process work briefly?
So it's just a way for us to, and actually we have organizations going through that process now here in Chicago. It's a way for us to reconnect with each other, to share the history and truths, as Ricky mentioned, but then also to co-design a city without segregation and that values the people that have been marginalized the most to be the designers of what we want this future to be like. Nan and her group are doing a version of this through their plan. We need to do this at a broader scale, and we need to include the voices that have been oppressed and marginalized for so long as the co-designers of this process. I'm tired of having civic leaders and foundation leaders and wealthy people make that process. It needs to happen by community leaders who are seeing this and working on this every day, just like the people that are here on this panel.
And Tonika, you have something called the Folded Map Action Kit. What can you just give us the elevator pitch on the action kit? What are some of the calls to action in the action kit?
The action kit is actually something that Nan's group should do, and my suggestion is one of the project participants in one of my projects said something so eloquent and said, it's our thoughts that are systemic. That's what segregation does. It makes our thoughts systemic. And our job has to be to dismantle those thoughts. And the way you do that is by focusing on disrupting these systemic experiences you have. You like Nan, you said your group, you had the epiphany that you all were segregated as well. And so it's not necessarily a requirement for you all to make your group integrated, but the duty should be to provide yourself with experiences with others so that you all can transform your thoughts and bring that back to your community. So the next time that any one of you all see a young Black man walking down the street in your neighborhood, the first thing you think of won't be the systemic thought of, let me grab my purse. So that is what the action kit is. It provides a way without hierarchy for people to experience as close as possible what a neighborhood is like as a resident, so you can understand what disparity truly is. It's unfair investment. So to run errands in your map to a neighborhood, that's really what it is. And to share back your experience and what you observed, because buying lotion and an organic apple is very different in our community and it shouldn't be.
So instead of coming to Englewood to volunteer, a group like Nan's would be coming to Englewood to go grocery shopping, and there'd be assignments to go buy some apples.
Yes, so then they can get mad at the same stuff that we get mad about. They'll be like, why are these apples looking like this?
Unfortunately, like I said, we could talk for another hour. We'll have to leave it there. Tonika Johnson, José Rico, Pastor Ricky Brown, and Nan Parson, thanks for joining us. And thanks also to our community engagement partners, the Folded Map Project, of course, and the Metropolitan Planning Council, as well as to our journalism partners, Southside Weekly, the Invisible Institute, and WTTW News. And thanks as always to our members and funders for their support of this project. A reminder, you can watch the entire Firsthand documentary series on the PBS app and at WTTW.com/firsthand, where you'll also find expert talks, text journalism, a discussion guide, and more. And a reminder that right now, you can watch Segregation, a WTTW news special. You can tune into WTTW 11, go to our YouTube, our the PBS app, the WTTW.com, all of our platforms to watch Segregation, a WTTW news special, where Tonika and Jose, you're both going to be there. You have to hurry up and move to Chicago tonight. All right. Thanks to all of you at home for joining us. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks.